Today's topic is a little, so what this is a version of a talk that I give on the road and at universities. I do this about once a semester at SMU. It's the history of Bitcoin. But because this is a slightly more advanced crowd, usually I'm talking to MBA or IT students that maybe are really unfamiliar with Bitcoin. So it's very rudimentary. There's going to be a little bit of that level sets this. But then we're going to go into some of the more interesting stuff. But like he said about me, I run some agencies around here. I have work with the IBM Futures program, and you can just find me all over the internet using that. Here's about my philosophy. This is kind of level set, this part of it. I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist per se. I guess I made up this word for this presentation. I'm a mostmalist, because I do a lot of blockchain consulting, and I have to interact in the world of ICOs, and this stuff is moving really fast, and there's a lot of stuff that I want to do that Bitcoin can't do. And so, but I'm very selective as well. If Bitcoin can do it, I don't want to be in your project. But there's a lot of stuff, and we're going to talk about that today, Bitcoin can't do. It has to be Bitcoin plus, and there's no shame in that. I'm a radical crypto anarchist. As Tony mentioned on the promo podcast on Crypto President, I did some work with John McAfee on his presidential campaign. Back when that was going on, I've been in the Libertarian Party for a while. That's my background as far as that politically goes. And I mention that just because, again, this is going to be a theme of what I'm talking about. You can't extricate politics from blockchain. I'm an IBM futurist. I mentioned that a couple of times, but the reason why I bring it up again is because I'm constantly exposed to the blockchain, not Bitcoin propaganda. It's false. You can't have one without the other. But here we go. Next slide. Okay, so what is Bitcoin? I start every speech out with this. This is my level set. Bitcoin is the reference architecture for blockchain, which is an internet protocol for removing the requirement for trust between counterparties. You can't have blockchain without Bitcoin. I think we all understand what it is, but it's it's the world's first fully decentralized currency. It uses a concept called tokens. It's not new to the idea of money and tokens, but it is the first time it was codified in such a way, unlike previous digital currency attempts in the past where PayPal and Apple, Venmo, things that have been centralized. What makes it different from other blockchains? It is the most secure and tested consensus mechanism of all blockchain. If you go to blockchain conferences all the time, IBM has their own consensus mechanisms that don't involve tokens. I'm always suspicious of new consensus mechanisms because without a financial incentive for honesty, you may not have it. You're just relying on trust, and that's not what this whole thing is for. This whole thing is to remove the requirement for trust. If there's no owner, how is integrity maintained? With Bitcoin, it's with miners. Everybody in this room most likely understands what mining is about and how consensus mechanisms work. If you don't, take a picture of this slide and talk to me later. Why does blockchain, not Bitcoin, matter? So this is a unique slide for this room because a lot of you guys are Bitcoin maximalists, but you can't ignore this contingent. Oracle and IBM specifically are combined investing more money into blockchain than any of our friends could ever hope to in their life. I mean, so I realized this was a big deal. I've been in the IBM Futures program since before IBM was really big into blockchain. I showed up, I think it was in 2016 or 2017. It was 2017 to one of the big conferences, and Gina Remidi gets up on stage. They have like 6 hours of keynotes over the course of a week. She spent half of her time talking about AI, which is very understandable because they've been spending the last 13 years investing in Watson. And then the other half of her time was spent talking about blockchain. They are betting the farm on blockchain. They're a multi-billion-dollar company. Everyone's heard the saying, no one ever got fired for hiring IBM. Unfortunately, and hopefully none of my IBM handlers are in the room hearing me say this, but I don't really like their implementation of blockchain. It kind of, it forked Ethereum, which itself kind of forks a lot of the core principles of Bitcoin. And so they're a couple of standard deviations away from a lot of the founding principles of blockchain, and therefore have lost a lot of the value proposition that blockchain can bring to them. But They are the elephant in the room. So anytime you're going into a business context, you're coming from it with a core principles of Bitcoin in your head, this is what you're fighting against. And it's understandable how they got there, and we're going to find out why as I go through the history here. But to start, again, level set, this thing starts in 1978. That's when you started talking about the Byzantine general problem. And in case you haven't heard that, this is a great analogy to get in your head, especially when you're trying to explain Bitcoin to your friends and family. I hear all kinds of crazy explanations of Bitcoin. Well, it's like this or it's like that, and it never quite resonates. And there's a reason why the Byzantine general problem is easier to use, is because it was what Satoshi used in his white paper, and it's what started this whole revolution. If you're not familiar with it, the idea is that you've got the Byzantine army. Their military structure is not like the military structure where it's hierarchical. It's a bunch of peer generals, and they have to communicate with each other. And they've got this big battle that's coming up that's pivotal to the war. And if they all advance in unison, or if they all retreat in unison, the war is still winnable. But if they don't do everything in unison, the whole war is lost and the empire falls. And to make matters even worse, the communications mechanisms between those generals are unreliable. Sometimes the couriers are loyal to different factions. Sometimes the generals themselves are loyal to different factions, or loyal to themselves, or are traitors to the empire. So how do you get all these self-interested generals to all act in unison in the best interest of the empire? And this is a computer science problem that's been worked on since the late 70s and early 80s. And this is what Satoshi's white paper meant to solve. And that's the 9 pages of information you're reading about when you read Satoshi's white paper, is the solution to the computer science problem. It's also not just for currency. It's also been a problem that's been solved, attempted to have been solved in like aeronautics and rocket space, space rocketry and that sort of thing. It's an interesting thing. So if you're geek out on that type of thing, do that. So 1985 is the next date of note. It's the roots of the term cypherpunk get traced back to cryptographer David Chow. He wrote online commonly about topics of anonymous digital cash and pseudonymous reputation systems. Then around the time the creation, there was, well, let's see, is this, yeah. So right around the creation of the Cypherpunk mailing list, Timothy May, who's a technical and political writer, published something called the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. This is 1992, but I mean, I put a few quotes from this thing, and you should just read the whole thing when you've got time. It'll take you a minute and a half, 2 minutes or something. But some of the phrases in there were like, interactions over networks will be untraceable via extensive rerouting of encrypted packets and tamper-proof boxes. That sounds pretty prescient. The technology for this revolution will surely be both a social and economic revolution. They have existed in theory for past decade. And the state will try to slow or halt the spread of this technology, citing national security concerns, use of the technology by drug dealers, tax evaders, and fear of societal disintegration. Doesn't that sound familiar? We're living in the future, he predicted in 1992. So he and a few other folks put together a mailing list. I'm actually proud to say I was on this mailing list, even though I was in high school at the time. This also was kind of reminiscent of the world we live in. If you go to Bitcoin talk forums or Reddit, there's an equal division of personal arguments and attacks, political discussion, technical discussion, and spam. It hasn't changed since 1992. But these thought leaders and activists and writers published a lot of important works through this list. This is Eric Hughes. He was one of the founders of the mailing list. He published something in '93 called the Cypherpunk Manifesto. This is another great, it was perhaps a little bit more eloquent, also equally prescient. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. We're just talking about that, perhaps having anonymous loan systems based on cryptocurrency. Information longs to be free. It's one of those classic quotes that gets bandied around. Cypherpunk's write code. I mean, it was just kind of like a foundational document, and it kind of established the ethos. Again, read this one too. This is easy to find on the internet, and it's take you about 2-3 minutes to read, but you'll be shocked at how much was kind of foretold in these documents. So the next big milestone, Hashcash, was created by Dr. Adam Back in 1997. It was primarily designed as an anti-spam mechanism, which would add a little bit of time and computational power to the movement of sending email, trying to make it a little bit more difficult to spam the network. If you have played around with Ryblocks, or I guess they're called Nano now, they have that. It's a no-fee blockchain experiment. They use this technique to prevent spamming of the network, you know, and creating full blocks for zero cost. So Wei Dai published the proposal for B-Money in 1998. This is a long time ago, but it included a lot of foundational concepts. Again, I mentioned Ryblocks and Nano in here. A lot of what was done originally in B-Money has been incorporated into that specifically. I'd say not just Nano, but also if you've heard of the hash graph, they use this kind of block lattice structure idea. In B-Money, was every participant on the network would maintain a separate database of how much money belongs to the users, and then all records are kept by a specific group of users. I think we would call those nodes now. Hal Finney, that's a name a lot of people recognize because he was suspected of perhaps being Satoshi Nakamoto, or at least one of the people in the collective that could be Satoshi Nakamoto. He's a frozen head now until we can figure out a way to cure ALS. But he created in 2004 reusable proofs of work, which borrowed heavily from the concepts of Hashcash. 2004, Nick Szabo, who's still very active in the community, published a white paper for BitGold. Nick Szabo is also one of the guys that's considered to be a candidate for Satoshi Nakamoto, though he vehemently denies it. He built heavily on the shoulders of Hal Finney, and also was very involved in the early Bitcoin network. Then in 2008, now we've actually got to the point where Bitcoin is a word. 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto publishes the white paper. Again, 9 pages. If you haven't read it and you're in this room, just read it. It's not like the white papers that get published now. I mean, I kind of chuckle because I haven't published a white paper less than 40 pages myself. I've done like 15 or 20 of these things at this point. You can't get them done as eloquently and concisely. But look how many years was spent. You know, look back here. I mean, they started working on this stuff like in 93. Started thinking about it seriously in 97. 2008, almost a decade later. I mean, it's a lot of thought. Think about how quickly these white papers get turned out now. They're like 5 minutes to get a white paper and an ICO. So anyway, the first 50 Bitcoins are mined in 2009. They were done on a general purpose computer using the CPU. Those were the days. Wish I got in at that time. The first U.S. Bitcoin exchange. Now this is kind of fun. $1 would have bought you 1,309.03 Bitcoins, or put it another way, to buy 1 Bitcoin, you need 76 tenths of a cent. Sorry, hundredths of a cent. That would be neat. Bitcoin Pizza Day is the first real-world transaction of pizza. Sorry, not real-world transaction. Real-world transaction of Bitcoin for pizza. It's a couple of Papa John's pizza. Got a $25 worth of Bitcoin, or $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, or 10,000 Bitcoins. You can go to, I think it's at Bitcoin Pizza on Twitter, and it publishes a daily number of dollars that pizza cost. I pulled this up last night. It said it was $62 million based on the spot price yesterday. So, 2011, this is getting close to where I got into things. It was the dawn of GPU mining, but this is where things start to get interesting. I won't focus on the mining. I'm going to focus on Silk Road. Hey, why are we talking about Silk Road? I thought we were past the hookers and blow era of Bitcoin. Why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about it because I'm a crypto anarchist, and it's important to understand this is the real reason why the stuff was created. I mean, go back to that crypto anarchist manifesto. This is the inspiration right here, right? To transact with total freedom, with no interference from the state. And finally, in 2011, we're here. right? It's best known as the platform for selling illegal drugs. But as Kathy Reisenwitz, a cryptocurrency lecturer and libertarian activist later put it, one Bitcoin user created an exchange which completely solved the problem of violence in the drug trade. He created the eBay for narcotics. In so doing, he replaced broken kneecaps with bad user reviews. It's powerful though, right? I mean, and so this is when I got in. It was about April 2011. As I recall, the price was around about $7, $9. So this, ironically, was a friend of mine who was a VP at Bank of America that introduced me to it. We would go and geek out on tech stuff at a coffee shop late at night. And I would pay for the meal, and he would pay me back in Bitcoin. So those cups of coffee are roughly worth about $6,000, $7,000 at today's spot price. But I couldn't imagine the price getting much higher than 12 bucks a Bitcoin, which I was quickly proven wrong. Because again, what shot the price up for Bitcoin in June 9th, but an article by Gawker about Silk Road. And everyone said, hey, we've got something here. So the end of solo mining kind of sunsetted around the same time. Bitcoin hit $1. A year later, I was on broadcast video talking about how I thought Bitcoin might be overvalued at $100. I was wrong. It boomed, doubling to more than $200 the week after I said that. I stopped making price predictions about that time. But why did it boom? It was due to the Cyprus banking crisis. If you guys remember that, this is back when Europe was ate up with the austerity measures and whatnot for the Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain that were all basically bankrupt states. Cyprus at the time said, you know what we're going to do? Anybody that's got a checking account or bank account, we're going to take money out of that and pay our debt with it. And Cyprus said, where's the Bitcoin ATM? And I mean, that's literally what happened. It was amazing, but it proved out what Bitcoin was good for. GPU mining started ending here because of the popularity of Bitcoin and the increased usage and the gold rush, more people in the network, higher difficulty. GPU stopped being very profitable. Butterfly Labs started shipping a couple miners. If you're around then, you realize, or you remember they didn't have a really good track record. It was also the beginning of dominance of the Chinese interests in the infrastructure of Bitcoin. And then Bitcoin hit $1,000 in November 29th, 2013. I don't know if you were around during this period of time. It was a little bit painful. Bitcoin hit $1,200 at its peak at 12/16. It was probably due to a little bit of market manipulation on the GOX exchange, as well as the increase in Chinese interest and buyouts and whatnot, and the mining interest and whatnot. At the time, MT GOX accounted for 70% of all Bitcoin transactions in one centralized website. That's a problem. We'll talk about that. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about it now. It's been said in every presentation. If you don't own your keys, you don't own your Bitcoin. That's exactly what happened here. Skip too fast. A little bit later, the DEA bust their first Silk Road user. Seized 11 Bitcoins, then worth about a total of $814. Media suspect it was part of a honeypot. Very shortly thereafter, October 2nd, the FBI arrested Ross Ulbricht, a UT Dallas alum. He was alleged by the FBI to be the founder of Silk Road. He later copped to it. He copped to being the founder, but he never really quite admitted that he was the operator for all the time. He said he handed off the site to the founder of MT GOX. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but he was arrested in San Francisco. The FBI seized initially 26,000 Bitcoins, then later auctioned them off. Ross was handed 2 lifetime sentences, as well as 3 lesser ones, to be served concurrently with 0 chance of parole for operating a website that allowed people to buy drugs. They made a bunch of allegations. I know this gets really deep into it. They made a bunch of allegations that he was hiring hitmen and stuff like that, but none of that was even proven, nor was he ever charged with any of that stuff either. It was just seems like it was there to sully his reputation, erode any support that he had from the public. But continues to be somewhat of a hero in the crypto anarchist movement because he created, the whole, the velocity for that the darknets have that allow kind of the free trade of basically everything else. But that period of time kind of marked the end of the meteoric growth of Bitcoin and blockchain. It didn't mean that nothing happened, it just meant nothing happened with the price, and it allowed us geeks to go back about our business and play with stuff in peace without being associated with the hookers and blow again for a little bit. This is about when IBM started getting involved too. It was about the middle of this 2013 to 2017 period. They started really getting involved. This is when Ethereum popped out. This is when a lot of the first of the, not too many of them on the top 10 list are left on the top 10 from this period, but a few of them are. But then this is when probably most people started hearing about Bitcoin and thinking about it seriously. It was when Bitcoin finally hit $1,000 again. Bitcoin hobbled close to $1,000, then began its trek to December towards 20 grand, or just short of 20 grand. But this began the phase of cryptocurrency when the world began seeing Bitcoin as a solid investment. Individuals and startups outside the world of tech started taking it seriously. They never really did before. So, then we get into the hard forks and the scaling issues, which have been covered from a bunch of different angles today. And then this is kind of the last most important milestone in modern times that I throw on the list is the end of Bitcoin dominance. And this is important to understand and to recognize because Bitcoin exists along an ecosystem of hundreds, if not thousands of other serious blockchain projects where you can perfectly instrument the amount of capital that are involved in these projects. But Bitcoin at this point is far less than 50% of the blockchain markets, but it is still by far and away the largest chunk of that. And I think this is good news. Blockchain is an instrument for, or is a protocol for instrumenting value. A lot of people think about all these blockchain projects and ICOs as trying to create money out of thin air. I don't think of it that way. And I'll give you an example of why I don't think of it that way. There was a client I was talking to, everybody heard like the Olive Garden infinite pasta pass that they have? It's this thing that they sell at the beginning of the year for like $700 and you can just gorge yourself as much as you want on spaghetti for the rest of the year. It's an interesting promotion. It helps Olive Garden raise capital. And there's a lot of restaurant marketing firms that do this sort of thing for kind of down market chains and that sort of stuff. And so they have raised capital so that like a 5-chain restaurant can put a deck on the front of their restaurant and make it look nicer for the year or whatever. They're basically trading against their own pasta futures, something like that. But anyway, I was talking to this company that does like 4,500 of these things a year for different restaurants around the world, and they were interested in blockchain. Essentially, if you're talking about doing an ICO, if you take that process and blockchain it up, does that mean we're creating new capital out of thin air? No, this is exactly the same amount of sales that would have done before. What if you're Starbucks and you're instrumenting your Starbucks points on a blockchain? You're not creating capital out of thin air, and it doesn't make sense to do that with a Bitcoin network, but it does make sense to perfectly instrument your capital in a new way. And you're going to continue to see, as people understand how these protocols work, you're going to continue to see this type of thing happen, where Bitcoin's dominance will shrink and shrink and shrink as compared to all this other instrumented capital. But that doesn't necessarily mean the amount of capital inside of Bitcoin is going to shrink. In fact, it will probably remain one of the primary conduits for capital to get into these new types of deals. It's currently the case right now. So here's the key learnings and a puppy tax. That's my dog. Her name is Token. There's no such thing as blockchain, not Bitcoin. You can't. Even as much as IBM and Oracle want this to be the case, you cannot talk about instrumenting capital for your pasta bowl without acknowledging the fact that this is created as a fundamental tool for freedom, right? Your pasta bowl pass will be, publicly tradable on, Binance and the decentralized exchanges, and as much as it will be inside of your official app. That's how this works. That's why this works. It's an inherently political concept. It's inspired and created by people who generally lean towards philosophies that favor individual liberty and voluntarism. If you're not down with that, this is not your world. Blockchain and Bitcoin. Bitcoin paved the way, but just as Nick Szabo, Hal Finney, Wade Dye, Adam Back, Eric Hughes, John Gilmore, and Timothy May built on each other's shoulders, so too do the other projects outside of Bitcoin that advance the ideals of crypto-anarchism. And make no mistake, every time you see a blockchain project, it's crypto-anarchism. We're building the tools that will allow us to no longer have to rely on government. That's what this is. And finally, you got to dig into the culture of this stuff. This will help you create tools that may not be Bitcoin, but are congruent with Bitcoin, right? That's my true definition of that mostmalism word that I made up at the beginning of this thing. A lot of the Bitcoin maximalists will look at the pantheon, the diaspora of blockchain projects and note that most of them are scams, and they're absolutely correct. And it feels overwhelming because it's hard to discern, how do you look at a project and go, this is not a scam? So you just label them all scams and leave them alone. I think a more intelligent approach is going, what are the projects that are keeping with the ethos of cypherpunk and crypto-anarchism that are complementary to Bitcoin? Things like Open Bazaar. Look, that's based on an idea that we should have a completely decentralized means of exchanging goods and services, just like what Silk Road tried to be. But Silk Road was a centralized system. Mt. Gox was a centralized system. These were ideas that were not yet fully baked, and you couldn't implement them on top of the Bitcoin blockchain fully. But look at Lightning Network. That's not Bitcoin. That's Bitcoin Plus. But it certainly is congruent with the ideas of cypherpunk and crypto-anarchism. It is, in my opinion, in the spirit of where this all was created. So, anyway, that's that. Do I have time for questions? No? Okay. I told you that was going to happen. Find me later. Thanks.